the simplest thing, the most common things that you need to worry about when we are talking about performance of the Zabbix monitoring system. And to be more precise, the performance issues and most common mistakes that the users make, and in the result, they are getting those performance issues. So first of all, how can you know that you are facing some of the performance issues? There are like two absolutely visible things or problems that might tell you that there are some issues. First of all, you are receiving a lot of false positive alerts. You open your dashboard and you see a lot. Well, of course, depends from your size of your monitored environment, but usually really a lot problems. And the common thing between those problems is if you're using a default template, those will be agent on host something something is unreachable for more than 5 minutes. How can we, or not how can we, but let me show you the trigger. Template app Zabbix agent triggers. This is this guy. Zabbix agent on host.name is unreachable for 5 minutes. An expression of this trigger is no data 5 minutes. So when this item won't receive a data, the ping, response from the ping, for at least 5 minutes, it will go to the problem state. But let's say you log into your dashboard, you see a lot of those problems, then you, oh my god, like half of my hosts are not reachable, they're not running. You try to SSH or remote desktop to them, and well, no, everything is actually fine. The agent is also running, agent is reporting to the Zabbix server, you check the latest data in the front end, and it's also there. Or maybe there are just a lot of the gaps. So just keep this bunch of information that I told you just now, and let's keep moving forward. So another problem, the visible problem, might be pretty simple. Very slow front end. You log into the front end, you click, I don't know, configuration hosts, and you need to wait 20-30 seconds until the page will open. That's of course also the performance issue. Then, when we talk through those two main things, how can we troubleshoot it? By default, there is a Zabbix server host. I don't know why, but pretty often users tend to delete it, and they're not monitoring their Zabbix server, which is super huge mistake. Definitely, you should monitor your Zabbix server, your agents, and your proxy servers. And there are official templates for that. And for the server, there is a template app, Zabbix server. And it is found here. Zabbix server. There we go. With an items, with the triggers, but most important, with the graphs. And these are the performance graphs, which will clearly indicate how our Zabbix system currently behaves. Are there any performance issues, or is everything fine, or is there some problems? We can view those graphs in the monitoring graphs, then choose your Zabbix server host and choose the graphs. The most important will be these 5. Let's start from the bottom, the Zabbix server performance. You will see the picture, something similar like this. There will be a green line and then will be the red line. This is how many values are processed by the Zabbix server per second, and this value clearly indicates the size of your Zabbix instance. Count of the hosts, count of the items, triggers, those do not measure how big is your monitored environment. This value does. New values processed by Zabbix server per second. I have just a demo installation and it's 1.15. Average, from my experience, could be something around a couple of thousands. The most largest number I've seen are something around 60,000 new values per second. That is super huge. Super huge, and it will require very powerful computers, very advanced performance tuning and understanding of what users are doing. So what can we see from this graph? The queue. Queue means the count of the queue is amount of delayed items. Based on the update interval, we expected the new value from an item right now, but it's still not here. So it's in the queue. And the queue is also a symptom of the bad performance. If you open a period, let's say for a month or a week, and you see that queue was always 0 and VPS, new values per second, stayed around, let's say 100, then something happened, you received a lot of alerts, and you open this graph, you see that the green line, values processed by Zabbix server, dropped to, let's say, 20, and instead the queue raised to 60 or 80 or something else. This is again another thing that clearly indicates that you are having a performance issues, but we're still not to the possible causes. So let's go to the next graphs. Internal process busy. This is also very important graph, and you will find the internal processes of the Zabbix server: the timer, escalator, housekeeper, alerter, configuration syncer, DB, watchdog, history syncer, self-monitoring. I guess we will have to make an additional video about all of these processes, but I will mention just those that let's say most likely you will see some action from them on this graph. First of all, the housekeeper. Housekeeper is responsible to delete old history data and old entries from your database based on the config, and that is happening once per hour. So let's say if once per hour you see the housekeeper raises to 50–60%, then after a minute or two it drops to 0. That is fine, that is normal. If you see that housekeeper goes to 100% and then stays the 100% for half an hour and only then drops to 0, or it just stays for 100% all the time, then it is a problem. It means that housekeeper is not able to keep up with all of the data coming in. The delete statements from the database are happening too slow, and trust me, that will affect the performance of all your Zabbix installation. Most likely you will see that at the time when the housekeeper stays on the 100, the history syncer, the red line, will also start to raise. And when you will see that your history syncer is close to 100%, you will start receiving those false positive alerts. Keep this in mind. Let's continue to the next graph. Data gathering processes busy. These are the collector processes in your Zabbix, and each of them is responsible to collect the data from their own item types. Like example, if you are using an item type, Zabbix agent, that item type is being collected, polled by the poller. But if you are using Zabbix agent and in the brackets active, this item type is collected by the trapper. If you're using an SNMP agent, SNMP v1, v2, v3, that one again is collected by the poller. And the busier these processes are, the more it indicates how busy is all your system, all your collector processes. If these stay around, let's say 30, 40, 50%, it's not a tragedy. If you see some of them, again, raising till 100% or close to 100%, or quite constantly, let's say poller is 100% busy, that is a problem. It means that, let's say you have 100 items that should be processed by the pollers, but since it is 100% busy, it is not able to process all of those items in time, and that will create a queue. Another thing, all of these processes, most of these processes, can be increased in the configuration file of the Zabbix server. Same applies on the internal processes. But if you see that one of these processes is 100% busy, it does not always mean that you need to increase the count of those processes. It might simply mean, let me give you an example. You could have 100 items, as we talked about previously, 100 items that are monitored by the poller, and they are executed super fast, less than 1 second. 0 dot something, it gets the value. It's the LAN network, latency is super good, the checks are very simple, just like CPU load. Those 100 items would not make any problem for the default value of the poller's 5 internal processes. At the same time, if you would have those 100 items and each of them would require 15, 20 seconds to collect the data, the poller connects to the agent, requests the metric, and then it has to wait 15-20 seconds until the agent responds. Then the same amount, 5 pollers, will be getting busy. And then there are 2 options. How can you solve it? First of all, let's say not the best one, increase the count of the pollers. And the second one, fix your checks, make them run faster. Optimize them. If those are some kind of custom scripts, custom checks, really optimize them. Figure for some different ways how can you collect them to make it happen faster. History syncer, let me mention this. I also told you that when you will see the history syncer raising to around 100%, you will definitely feel additional performance problems. False positives, slow, the server isn't running, gaps in the graphs, and super high queue and stuff like that. And you might think like, okay, yeah, we talked about a poller, so I guess the time is to increase the count of the history syncers. It is also possible. By default, there are just 4 of them. But each of them is able to process around 1.3, 1.5 thousand new values per second. So you could have a system with 5,000 NVPS running with the default amount of the history syncers. So if you see that the history syncers are high, then there is some different issue. A performance issue with the database, performance issue with the disks, or with the connection from the Zabbix server to the database. Most likely, those would be the most common things. And you need to fix them instead of just increasing the amount of the history syncers. Why there is a correlation between the housekeeper and history syncer? Because when housekeeper is deleting the stuff from the history tables, it is locking those tables in the database. And history syncer's main task is to insert the data in the history tables. If table is locked, it is not able to do its stuff, and it just gets busy without doing anything, basically just waiting when it will be open for writing. Next, what happens when this situation happens? Your history syncer is 100% busy because you have a performance issues with the database, and housekeeper is also 100% busy. So there starts to raise a queue, and all the queue in this case will be stored in the history cache. So before the database, before the history syncer, there is history cache. When the poller and all of the other collector processes are collecting the data from the hosts, they are storing it in the history cache. If the history syncer, because of the performance issues, is not able to get this data from the cache and write it inside a database fast enough, of course the queue will grow inside a cache, and you will see history cache percentage free dropping, history syncer busy in the previous graph increasing, the queue in the server performance graph also increasing, a new alarms happening about the agent is not available more than 5 minutes because agent responded, agent does response, but the data stays in the cache. And as soon as it stays in the cache for more than 5 minutes, the trigger will fire. And you will see those false positives. Then after 5-10 minutes, maybe you will log into your console and you will see the data in the graphs, because after that 5-10 minutes, the history syncer will already get this data from the cache and write it inside the database, so it won't be missing. It was just stuck in the cache for more than your no data parameter. A lot of information. So next stuff about let's talk a little bit about the database tuning. So MariaDB and MySQL, those would be the most common databases. I have a MySQL here, use Zabbix, cool. You should know that the config file of MySQL and MariaDB, which is the fork of MySQL, is stored in etc my.cnf. This is a default config file. This config file is not enough for a production system of the Zabbix. Pretty simple. It's not enough. Sooner or later you will be starting to getting issues. Jeez, this dog. Starting to getting issues because of this config file. That's why I have a few additional tabs. Optimizing the database is super huge work, and it does requires the good knowledge. So if you have a DBAs in your company, you're a super lucky guy, and you can just tell them the problem and ask them to tune this configuration file. If you don't have a DBAs, then read this. This is 4 years old. Official, I think it was official, blog post, how to optimize MySQL for the Zabbix. All of this mentioned here still applies. And there's also a picture from one of the Zabbix conferences. This is absolutely not enough, but it is a lot better than a default config file. You must increase InnoDB buffer pool size for at least 75% of your memory on the system. Pull instances based on this parameter and this parameter. These four would be basically just must have on any system. Even if you have super small system, add these parameters. Remember that after adding these parameters in the config file, you will have to restart the database. So I would recommend, of course, to make a backup and do all of that stuff. Another thing, you must understand that it's not possible to tell all of the story about all possible performance issues and troubleshooting in 20 minutes. I don't know for how long we're already talking. I will post in the description another blog post from the Zabbix blog. This is really old, and the version here is 2. something. I don't remember, it might be 2.2. For our Russian viewers, there is also the same blog post in the Russian language, so you're welcome. And don't be afraid that this is about old version of the Zabbix. These are basically the basics. The main things that you need to know when you're building your Zabbix environment, Zabbix installation. This guy here describes all of it. The decision for the hardwares, decision for the operating systems, the tuning of the database, tuning of the high availability, if I'm not wrong, database replication. This is must read for all of you who are running a Zabbix installation. And this guy achieved 9400 NVPS in the far 2013 year. At that point in this version, it was impressive. It was really a lot. So read this for your information. Okay, I think this will be enough for one single video. And thank you for your attention. I don't know well, I hope that you will understand me because this was really just a rush through all of the things. Just keep in mind that don't overtune the Zabbix config file. This is the most common mistake. Everybody open the Zabbix server config file, found all those parameters and like, okay, I have a super powerful machine, let's make it the maximal value, 1000. IPMI polars, I don't even know what's the IPMI, but I will still add these to the maximal value. Oh, come on. 1000. That is the worst thing that you can do. Even if you have a super powerful machine with 40 plus cores and 500 memory, that is still the worst thing that you could do. Because this will make your performance even worse. You must find the golden spot. Based on these performance graphs, data gathering process busy and internal process busy, you must find a golden spot to keep your internal processes around 30%. Plus minus doesn't really matter. Data gathering, same. Something around 30%. It might be different in different environments. It might be spiking to 2080 at some time. If you don't issue any problems, it could be okay for your environment. Otherwise, try to increase it or try to understand why are they so busy. Maybe there are a network communication problem between the data sources. Maybe the checks are slow. For some reasons, optimize them and it will become better. For the caches, try to keep them around, not this, Zabbix cache usage, try to keep them around 70, something around that, 70%. Config cache might be lower. Don't forget that any change in the config file does require a restart, which is not always possible on the fly in the production instances. There are triggers, default triggers for the 25%. When the cache will be less than 25, it will raise a problem. But depending on the policy of your company, let's say you receive a trigger, the cache is less than 25%, and you'll have acceptance from the management to restart your server only after a week or two. And you cannot be sure that that Zabbix installation will be capable to work for that week or two on that low cache. Because at the moment when the cache will drop to 0%, your Zabbix server will simply crash. And that, of course, will cause more problems. That will be unexpected downtime and all of the bad things from that. Okay, that's enough. That's enough for this one. Yeah, once again, Twin, thank you for attention. Comments, if you have any questions about this topic, and most likely you have, just post them in the comments. I will try to answer all of them. And yeah, okay, thank you, and have a good one. Goodbye.